Sean Diddy Combs isn't just fighting for his freedom, he's fighting to hold on to his fortune. Forbes now estimates his net worth is $400 million, a significant drop from the $740 million valuation just a few years ago. But that number could shrink even more. Federal prosecutors are moving to seize assets tied to the alleged criminal activity.
The man once known as Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, and finally, Love, has learned the cruelest lesson of all: fame is fleeting, but legal consequences are absolute. Sean Combs, the architect of a billion-dollar hip-hop empire, watched his financial kingdom dissolve not just in months.
Once considered a billionaire with a vodka line, a TV network, and a clothing brand, Sean Combs' fortune has taken a major hit. Forbes estimates his net worth is roughly $400 million, nearly half of what it was just a few years ago. Both his Beverly Hills and Miami mansions were raided in March of 2024 as part of the investigation into his alleged crimes. And that number may continue to drop as Combs faces a federal trial and a Justice Department forfeiture action that could cost him his empire. An empire that prosecutors allege was built, at least in part, through a pattern of criminal activity, including alleged sex trafficking, drug distribution, and violence, all used to advance what they call a racketeering enterprise. In the unsealed indictment, prosecutors outline how his business and personal assets allegedly played a role in carrying out or concealing the crimes. This means any assets connected to the behavior, even indirectly, could be seized, including real estate, companies, vehicles, and aircrafts. Now, his $60 million private jet has reportedly already been sold. The Beverly Hills estate is currently on the market for $61 million. And while Combs still owns his $48 million Miami mansion, a judge denied his request to use it as collateral for bond. In week 2 of testimony, Homeland Security Special Agent Gannon took the stand. Gannon, who helped lead the March raids of Combs' homes, walked jurors through photos of the items seized. Among them, parts of AR-15 style rifles with the serial number scratched off, loaded magazines, a Gucci bag reportedly filled with ketamine and MDMA, and personal items like lingerie and dozens of bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Prosecutors say this evidence is critical to establishing the elements required under federal racketeering laws, helping them show a pattern of alleged crime, criminal behavior used to sustain or conceal the enterprise. In an effort to protect what's left of his assets, Combs hired Stefan Casella, former deputy chief of the Justice Department's asset forfeiture and money laundering section, to fight the forfeiture action. If the jury finds Combs guilty, it will be up to them to determine how much of Combs' assets are subject to forfeiture. Anything forfeited after a conviction could be used to support alleged victims. Sean Combs denies all allegations. And to help us break down what's at stake, I'm joined by Jim Trusty. He's the former chief of the Department of Justice, Organized Crime and Gang Section. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure. Good to be here.
So, Jim, let's start with the forfeiture. This isn't just about prison time anymore. Prosecutors want his empire. From what you've seen in the filings, how aggressive is this?
Well, it looks to be very aggressive, and there's a couple of reasons I say that. The first is it's very broadly worded. What they're talking about is essentially any property, real or personal, that could constitute either facilitating property or instrumentalities, they call it, or proceeds. And so that's kind of the whole business empire of P. Diddy being at risk. And that's the second part, which is it's a RICO case, a criminal enterprise case, where they've defined the organization, the criminal enterprise, as not just Sean Combs, but as all these business interests that he has, including liquor labels, music labels, everything else you can think of. So they've set it up in a way where when they get to a forfeiture phase, if there's a conviction, the sky's the limit, and it looks like they're going to try to take.
But almost overnight, in the wake of his courtroom downfall, this is the story of how Diddy lost everything, how his entire fortune, which he once boasted was in the billionaire stratosphere, vanished into a black hole of legal fees, lost deals, and crippling liability. The scale of this collapse is unprecedented. Just a few years ago, Diddy's net worth was comfortably estimated at over $800 million, and he persistently claimed the title of a billionaire. He was more than a rapper. He was an institution, a brand, a symbol of ultimate, aspirational success in black culture. but that symbol has been utterly shattered. Now, after his conviction on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, after the sentencing to 50 months behind bars, the most reliable estimates place his net worth at a staggering $400 million. That's a loss of over half his peak fortune, a $500 million destruction of wealth, and the bleeding is far from over. The vanishing act of Diddy's fortune can be traced directly to the moment the public and, more important,
Is that normal, though, for the government to file something so broad?
I've seen it before. I mean, in the context of racketeering cases, you tell a much more complete story in a RICO case. You don't just focus on a particular moment in time or a crime. You tell the whole story of this criminal enterprise, which lends itself to big forfeiture moments. And so it's not totally unusual to see it this broadly worded. What I think is a little unusual is it's not very specific in terms of any preliminary seizures. It looks like they haven't actually seized anything yet, even though they executed search warrants and looked for evidence of things. And so a lot of times you'll see listings in there of bank accounts, automobiles, jets, whatever, that the government has already preliminarily seized to make sure it's still going to be available at the time they do a forfeiture hearing. So this one, it's a blank slate. And it's blank enough where if you're the defense attorney and you get to this next phase, which, by the way, is supposed to be with the same jury. They may not know that yet. But that second phase would be one where you really would say to the judge, I don't have any notice here, Your Honor. This is so broadly worded. I need to particularize it, have a chance to digest it, and perhaps bring in expert testimony on both sides about kind of legitimate sources of income versus illegitimate ones.
And you mentioned that, they're also linking his company. So maybe that's his, record studio, or maybe that's, his vodka line. But how does something like a vodka line, how can that potentially even be mixed up with this? How can they say that that's linked to an alleged crime?
Yeah, it's really one of two or maybe even three ways. One is if there's somehow a tie-in where that property, that business was used to facilitate the freak-offs that are in the indictment, for instance, or obstructionist behavior. So if they literally used a record studio for a party and the record studio belonged to one of his companies, you could say that actually facilitated or was an instrumentality to support the criminal conduct. The other way is essentially if it is a proceed, if it was essentially built on money that comes from illegal activity. And then thirdly, and this is where it gets really crazy confusing, so I'll keep it short. Sometimes there's something called substitute assets where the government says, okay, we realize that particular asset, that car, that piece of art was not actually bought by proceeds or served to contribute to the crime. But because we can't find enough to satisfy the overall amount we're owed, we're going to take it as a substitute asset. It's a very government-friendly area, this whole idea of federal forfeiture. And again, I think they're in a position where they might have their mitts on almost anything he's ever touched.
And how do they decide just that number that they're looking for? Is there kind of like a flat out number that the government, when charging with these types of cases, that they say, hey, we're looking for 50 million, we're looking for 60 million. How do they decide how much?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, that is an easier task in some circumstances where you have a fraud situation where you can tell the amount of victimization and say, well, look, it adds up to 2.5 million, and they put that in the forfeiture indictment. They don't have that here. In a drug case, for instance, you might say, well, they were responsible for 10 kilograms of cocaine. A kilogram's about 30,000. So we're looking for 3 million, do the math. Here, it's much more wide open. I think you're looking at an actual trial within a trial, if we get to the forfeiture phase, where there's going to be experts saying this is money that's untouched by any sort of criminal enterprise from the defense side, and maybe a forensic auditor from the FBI saying, here's why we're entitled to all these types of proceeds or instruments. So it is a wide open battlefield. It's going to be kind of a textbook example of how deep the government tries to reach for forfeiture if they get to that point.
At what point does that kind of strategy?
Corporate America could no longer ignore the horrific allegations. The foundation of his supposed billionaire status was his strategic partnership with the beverage giant Diageo, a deal built on the backs of Ciroc vodka and De Leon tequila. This was his financial engine, a source of recurring, immense income and undeniable status. When the lawsuits began to pile up, when the accusations grew too dark, that partnership was the first domino to fall. Diageo ended the relationship. The terms of the breakup saw him receive a payout, but it severed his greatest, most consistent revenue stream, which was In essence, the very soul of his business valuation, the deal that was once touted as potentially being worth $1 billion to him personally, was gone, just like that, overnight. Next came the catastrophic drain of the civil lawsuits. Diddy settled with his former partner, Cassie Ventura, just 24 hours after her explosive lawsuit was filed. While the exact figure is confidential, industry experts say the settlement ran into the tens of millions.
Strategy from prosecutors become legally risky for them, though.
That's the thing. I mean, the court of public opinion every now and then turns on forfeiture. And, the idea of forfeiture is that you don't want people to not just get away with crime, but profit from it. Being criminally prosecuted and put in prison doesn't mean that you've lost the assets. And so the idea is to kind of make things even, to hold people accountable, to not let them profit from criminal activity. But over time, you see abuses. You see situations where a person barely had a role in some sort of criminal conspiracy. I mean, literally was on the job for one day and is ordered to forfeit millions of dollars. And that bubbles up to the Supreme Court, where they say this is just not totally fair. So there are abuses of the forfeiture system that are seen from time to time. I think, look, if P. Diddy, if Sean Combs is convicted in this case, I don't think he's going to necessarily gin up a ton of sympathy. But there may be legal observers that say, hey, this is a broad, overreaching moment, when they try to collect every single penny that a guy who obviously had legitimate income over long periods of his life.
And for those that do say, hey, isn't this just a financial overreach? How do prosecutors justify that?
Yeah, I think they justify it by saying, in this case, they'll say, look, two things. Number one, we didn't disable him financially pre-trial. We haven't actually locked into his accounts and taken things and frozen things where it might even affect his ability to hire attorneys or hire experts. And secondly, they say, look, it's a criminal enterprise that extended for a number of years, that where he had financial profit from this kind of power and control over an enterprise. So I don't expect them to be apologetic. I mean, they may end up showing moments of moderation where they say, well, we're not going to go after this company or that company, but they've left it all on the table for now, where they can do a very broad, deeply reaching process if they want to.
And Sean Combs, he's already sold one jet. The Beverly Hills mansion of his is on the market for $61 million or so. Does that seem like someone who is confident that they'll walk, or could that work for or against him in court?
It's probably not going to be anything that's particularly admissible during the trial. It could come up during the forfeiture just to show that, his overall stock has dropped. I mean, I think he's down to his last 400 million. It's a real tough spot to be in. But but I think at the end of the day, you really can't draw any firm conclusions. He knows he's got a battle of his life going on right now. I mean, this is a life eligible racketeering case. Doesn't mean he'll necessarily get life. It's not a mandatory sentence. But if the facts continue to be established of years of abusive and controlling behavior, it paints a pretty dark picture for him in terms of sentencing.
And Sean Combs, he's now brought in Mr. Casella, someone who literally wrote the book on asset forfeiture. What's Casella's role likely to be here?
Well, I worked with Steph at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland for years. He is literally the expert on forfeiture. Whenever I have a situation in private practice where I have a question mark about forfeiture, that poor guy has to take my phone call. So he's a great pick. He knows what he's doing. He knows both the process and the law, which can be a little bit different sometimes. I think he's probably, getting them prepared for the types of challenges. And by the way, I don't know this from him, but I would guess that he's basically figuring out what are the types of challenges we could raise in a forfeiture phase. What are the deficiencies in the government's approach? In other words, are they not discounting lawful employment by Sean Combs? And frankly, some of it could even relate to like how he's spending money right now. When you have a broad forfeiture allegation, it's kind of hard to figure out, are they saying that I can't get attorneys of my choosing because I'm using proceeds of criminal activity? So I think he's probably giving a lot of very safe.
But that was only the beginning. He was then slammed with a massive $100 million default judgment in a civil sexual assault case in Michigan because he failed to properly respond to the complaint. That's $100 million gone, or at the very least, a crushing liability looming over his remaining assets, with a court order restraining him from selling off property that could be used to pay the judgment. Diddy's money is now flowing in only one direction, out. The costs of his top-tier legal defense in the criminal trial, an endeavor involving a team of the most expensive and high-profile attorneys in the country, have been astronomical. We're talking about millions upon millions spent just to defend a name that, despite the partial acquittal on the most serious charges, is now forever synonymous with a life of documented depravity and abuse. His business empire has imploded. He was forced to sell his majority stake in Revolt TV, the media company he founded, an asset sale that, while providing needed liquidity, took away a major platform and future earning potential. The Sean John fashion line, which was once an industry leader, has collapsed.
Guidance on how they walk through this process of dealing with a very broad, very deep, potentially deep-reaching forfeiture.
Since he is so knowledgeable, and since, I don't know if there's anyone who's more knowledgeable than him in this specific department, do you think that bringing him in may challenge the government's playbook at all?
I think it would certainly give them a moment of pause. Look, the reality is there's probably not a ton of time being spent worrying about forfeiture quite yet. They're probably figuring we'll get there when we get there. We got to try to get a conviction. But yeah, it's a shot across the bow. You see Steph Casella lining up on the other side, and you can say this about a lot of different type of expert witnesses and things where you say, wow, that's the king of DNA or the queen of forensic fingerprint recovery. So, I think it's a shot across the bow. They'll realize that they've got somebody that really knows their stuff on the other side, but that doesn't necessarily mean they change their approach in any way at this point.
And there's this idea of facilitating property, that a business or maybe an item helped enable a crime. How direct does that link need to be?
Yeah, we should ask Steph. But yeah, that's a great question. You have to be able to show, a significant link. It can't be just like this 6 steps removed kind of thing. Like there was a bottle of liquor that happened to be on the bar during one of these assaults, and he owns a liquor company, so therefore, the liquor, we can presume, facilitated the crime. You're going to have some, quantum of proof that's deeper than that. But it's very fact specific. And again, that's why I think you're probably looking, even though a lot of times forfeiture becomes a very small afterthought to a criminal trial, this one really has the potential to be a completely independent kind of mini trial, delving into his finances, delving into issues just like that. Like, how well connected can the government make these instrumentalities, these facilitating pieces of property? I think it's, inherently pretty difficult. But again, if you use a location, that's a little bit easier. If you say, I'm going to use my liquor company headquarters, or I'm going to use a record business studio to have one of these freak offs, that becomes a much tougher climb for the defense to get out of it as an instrumentality. It's these kind of third time removed ones where they might have some success.
And like how you said, we're not just talking about past behavior here. Prosecutors say that this was ongoing. Does that make asset recovery just a little bit easier for them?
Yeah, in general, I'd say yes. Because you're talking about a period of years, and you're going to have, during these trials, you're going to have very specific stories from witnesses that say, I was there when X happened at this particular location. But you're probably going to get broad characterizations too. Like, he would always, use his liquor to get people drunk before these freak offs. Or there were times where we met and discussed how we were going to do this at office X or home Y. Or how planes were used. It might not be a specific moment, but he might have somebody that says, I was at the airport when his private plane brought prostitutes here. So you might not have the precision that you'd have with kind of a single event trial, but you're probably going to have pretty significant stories that, again, tie these properties into the possibility of being forfeited.
How much of a role does public perception play here? Have we seen the DOJ make strategic decisions based on headlines?
Well, overall, sure. We could probably point to all sorts of cases that you could, I think, fairly characterize as a little bit of trophy hunting, where the Department of Justice or even non-federal prosecutors, think this is my great case, and they like the headlines that come with it. But look, I don't think this is an example of a case that's being brought in bad
value. With his exclusive deal with Macy's ending, his music catalog and publishing rights, while still incredibly valuable, are being eroded. The value of his creative output has been permanently stained by the moral weight of his conviction. Who is rushing to associate with the bad boy brand now? The answer is no one. Listen up. The story you thought you knew about Sean Diddy Combs is over. The curtain has dropped on the endless parties, the private jets, the champagne toasts. We are not talking about a simple downturn. We are talking about a catastrophic financial implosion. Diddy's fortress of wealth, which he spent 30 years building, has essentially vanished overnight in the wake of his total courtroom and legal downfall. This is the financial reckoning for a man who thought he was untouchable. Let's break down the sheer scale of this destruction. At his peak, fueled by a brilliant marketing mind and the relentless pursuit of the next big deal, Diddy claimed to be a billionaire. Forbes, more conservatively,
is going to influence the jury in that regard.
What about the assistants? You know, you talk about assistants cleaning up the hotel rooms, which if the jury accepts freak-offs were coerced sexual encounters with commercial sex workers, that they're crime scenes essentially, and they're setting them up, cleaning them up, that they were getting Combs drugs, which may or may not have been used to keep victims compliant, which is one of the allegations. One assistant talked about driving Combs to confront Suge Knight, who was his rival, that Combs was carrying guns, that they were watching the abuse of Cassie. One testified about having to buy some materials to maybe stop her swelling, maybe cover up. Do you think that they have established that if for racketeering conspiracy, Combs used his staff, his employees, his associates to commit crimes and cover them up? You think they've proven that?
Yes.
Okay.
I totally do. I think it's pretty clear that the staff was there, again, to service and protect the king, and that they're literally cleaning up crime scenes. I do think that's established.
What about forced labor? That's another underlying predicate crime for kidnapping. And if you want, I can lay out what I think might be it.
Yeah, you tell me what the forced labor is.
So you had testimony from assistants that they were working like essentially 24 hours, 7 days a week, that they were up 5 days straight. You had one assistant, Mia, who said that she was basically sexually assaulted. You had another who said they were blackmailed with tape of them dancing, I think, on a narcotic of some kind. So, you know, that's hanging over them as they're doing the work of Sean Combs. You have another who says that they were basically subjected to a lie detector test for days. One says they were threatened. Capricorn Clark, she also says that she was kidnapped. And you think about this environment that they're in, is this forced labor?
Yeah, I think you can probably get there from the totality of the circumstances. Some of this stuff is, and I've been in other cases where people complain about how hard it is to work for a celebrity, and there's a lot of whining about the hours are really bad, and the celebrities call you night and day, and they need things urgently. And that's just par for the course if you're going to be an assistant for somebody with that kind of lifestyle. But when you get to threats and videotapes and threats to turn them over to the police, now you're well outside what could reasonably be expected. And I guess that could get you to forced labor.
Okay, so I don't know if there's more that you want to add for racketeering conspiracy, but I think we nailed it, that they definitely have enough to survive like a motion to dismiss, right? To move it forward, motion for directed verdict, to go to the jury. We don't know what the jury will say, but you think that, I said they're probably 75% there, 80% there. I think there still needs to articulate a little bit more the flow of money and a little bit more the agreement, the understanding, the conspiracy. I mean, do you think that we have heard the testimony from co-conspirators? People have taken immunity deals, but you can't have a racketeering conspiracy and a legal agreement with himself. Do you think we've heard from the co-conspirators?
No, I think you could. I think the government could add a little conspiracy testimony, and also flow of money is very important in this kind of thing, so that could be helpful.
You think you need Christina Courtroom, the former chief of staff who's come up a lot during the course of this case?
I don't know if you need her, but I think it's optimal to have her.
Okay, so racketeering conspiracy, top charge, potentially life in prison, put that to the side. Let's go to the lowest hanging fruit, and then we'll get to sex trafficking. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Essentially, that Sean Combs transported sex workers and victims with the intent that they engage in sex work, that they're intent of prostitution. You don't need force, fraud, or coercion for sex trafficking. It's more of a...
Estimated his worth was well over $700 or $800 million, and climbing. The latest, most brutal estimates now put Sean Combs' net worth at approximately $400 million. Think about that. We are looking at a verifiable, confirmed loss of over $500 million, $500 million, erased from his balance sheet in a shocking 2-year period, a direct consequence of the tidal wave of legal action and his subsequent conviction. This is not a drop. This is a financial wipeout. The foundation of his financial empire was his strategic partnership with the liquor giant Diageo. This was the engine of his purported billionaire status, the sprawling deal that covered Ciroc vodka and De Leon tequila. It was a deal worth a king's ransom, bringing in guaranteed revenue and giving him a massive stake in the spirits industry. That deal is gone. Terminated. Diageo, facing extreme public scrutiny and their own legal battles with Combs, ended the business relationship, while Diddy was bought out for his stake in De Leon, receiving a one-time lump sum.
Straightforward charge, carries up to 10 years in prison. Have they proven that? Take Cassie's testimony. She claims that freak-offs happened in multiple locations, multiple cities. So if the jury accepts all these episodes were sex work, right? She's having sex or sexual relations with people who are being paid sex work. She also testified that the male performer, the escort, who was allegedly in the room at the LA Intercontinental Hotel in 2016 was named Jules. And Jules was used in multiple locations. That, to me, could be transportation.
And paid.
And paid.
And paid. Yeah. I think that is. You have a little bit of a risk if you're the prosecution that the jury is going to conclude that these were all willing participants and this wasn't really prostitution, this was a sex party. I think as a technical matter, if you pay a prostitute to come to another state and have sex with people, that is sex trafficking. That is exactly what that is.
And if he had Cassie do the payments and arrange it, could he still be found guilty?
Sure. It's his money. He is a participant in it. He knows it's happening. I don't think he can get out of it. Just because he's not the bag man on that one, I don't think he gets out of it.
So now we got 2 charges down. Let's talk about sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. So, in order to prove that, the government would have to show that force, fraud, coercion was used for her to be induced into engaging into these non-consensual episodes, these freak-offs with commercial sex workers. Maybe even, if you want to say whether they're paid or not, something of opportunity was dangled over her head, whether or not she was given something to engage in sex, talk about financial control, things of that nature. Has the government proven sex trafficking, which, by the way, has a mandatory minimum of 15 years in prison? Have they proven it?
So my view is yes, but I do understand where there could be a difference of opinion here because it's a question of fact. Was she compelled to engage in the activity she engaged in? There's no question that she engaged in the activity, right? So the question is that because she wanted to, or is that because of punishments and inducements to do it? And to me, this seems like domestic violence and a situation where the victim is subject to a lot of influence and a classic situation where you have one party in the relationship who has much more power, infinitely more power than the other person. And he is exerting that power to make her do what he wants. And the fact that she sometimes likes it, which is clearly true, right, from the evidence. I mean, it
The
does
text messages. Things
yeah,
like
it does
that.
appear that she at times is a willing participant, but overall, I still find it to meet the definition of sex trafficking.
Because the jury could accept there's no way she actually consented to this when you think about what she claimed happened to her. And you think about, I mean, the prosecution has been so keen at trying to establish what the environment was. You know, even talking about Brianna Bengolan allegedly being hanged off a 17-story balcony, the prosecution came out today and said, well, if Cassie was aware of it, it goes to coercion. It shows like the violence she was around and what would have happened. I said this before, I said again, this is not a clean prosecution.
Correct.
And I want to get to where the defense is going in a minute, because I think they've been doing a stellar job. I really do. But I think there are 2 concrete examples for sex trafficking for Cassie Ventura. I'm curious your thoughts. So number 1, 2016 hotel. So the idea is she claims she was leaving a freak off, so a commercial sex event, right?
The consistent, recurring, multi-million-dollar income stream, the one that guaranteed his financial stability and valuation, was cut off. The single largest pillar holding up his fortune has been permanently dismantled. Then came the money drain. A financial hemorrhage that no single fortune, no matter how large, could sustain. First, the immediate, shocking settlement with Cassie Ventura, which was a clear, unmissable signal of liability and cost him a massive, tens of millions of dollars payout just to shut down one lawsuit. But one only led to dozens. Today, Diddy is facing an onslaught of civil lawsuits, dozens of them, each one demanding multi-million-dollar damages. He has already been hit with a $100 million default judgment in a sexual assault case in Michigan, a massive sum that stands as a crushing liability against his remaining assets. Every single lawsuit, every filing, every new allegation brings a new wave of seven-figure legal fees for his army of defense lawyers. This money is simply pouring out of his accounts, never to be recovered. The physical assets that once symbolized his wealth are also being liquidated or threatened. His private jet has reportedly been sold. His multi-million-dollar luxury properties, the very backdrops for the alleged activities detailed in countless legal filings, are either on the market or face the threat of seizure to satisfy the endless stream of settlements and legal judgments. He is in the process of selling the symbols of his once untouchable power just to feed the ravenous beast of his legal debt. Diddy's fall from grace is a powerful and chilling reminder that the old adage is true: the law truly does not discriminate when it comes to accountability. No matter how rich or famous you are, he has been sentenced to prison, but the vanishing of his fortune is his financial death sentence. He has lost the ability to control his narrative, his brand, and worst of all, his money. The empire he spent decades building, the empire he thought was his fortress, was revealed to be a house of cards built on a foundation of alleged misconduct. And when the legal storm finally hit, it all came tumbling down. Diddy didn't just lose some money, he lost the very thing that defined him, his ability to be Sean Combs, the music mogul who could buy his way out of any problem. That power, that fortune, has vanished, leaving behind only the wreckage of a shattered legacy and a $500 million hole in his wallet.